We are Evergreen Exotics. I'm Emily.
I'm Chris.
And we live just north of Spokane, and we mainly keep things like carpet pythons, corn snakes, rainbow boas, Amazon tree boas.
Some odds and ends, a couple of Bismarck ring pythons, a couple green tree pythons, some rattles.
A couple monitors. We have a little mini Varanus tristis monitor, and then a black throat monitor as well. So yeah, that's us. So what we decide to keep versus breed, I think it just comes down to what we enjoy working with. We enjoy keeping reptiles and we enjoy sharing that with other people. And so I think the biggest thing for us is we like to breed things that we are interested in and hope that someone else is also interested in them. Like for me, I started with corn snakes. They're a perfect beginner for reptile people, and that's my favorite part about going to Reptile Expos is introducing new keepers to the reptile industry, and corn snakes are a wonderful way to do that because they're so hardy and they're so easy and they come in every single color under the rainbow now. So I think for me personally, it's just, I really enjoy that part of it, and introducing new people, especially kids, to the hobby. So I'll always have corn snakes for that reason. And I just enjoy working with, a lot of the more unique species as well. I think more and more as we get more into the hobby and older as well. For me, it's more of preservation as well. A lot of the species you don't necessarily see in the wild. Obviously, if we're traveling, maybe that's one thing, but not everybody has that luxury either. So
yeah, and I think for both of us, we both have our own unique interests. I love to keep and breed Amazon tree boas. She's not as much a fan of them. They're maybe a little bitey for her taste, but she keeps Vietnamese blue beauty snakes, and they're cool. They're not my cup of tea, but I think they're a fascinating snake as well. So there's a little bit, and then the Bismarcks. We both love the Bismarcks because they're fascinating pythons. So there's some that overlap, and we have our own individual ones that we keep for our own reasons. So yeah, for me, it's especially about keeping items that keep me passionate into reptile keeping, because I find if I don't, then I get a little complacent and it's not fun anymore. And that's a big part of the hobby, is making it fun. So my personal favorite species to keep is definitely going to be Amazon tree boas. The variability, the little bit of attitude keeps you on your toes. The fact that they perch most of the time, they're out and about, they're great to watch. Once they're established, they're hardy animals and relatively easy to breed. So, and while it's a limited list of morphs, there's some cool stuff. I mean, we have a few tigers. Those are amazing. They've definitely held my interest over the years of keeping them. So I bought one and thought wasn't sure I was going to be with a little more aggressive snake, but I mean, in comparison to some other things, they're not that bad, and they're fascinating.
For me, definitely the Vietnamese blue beauty snakes. I very distinctly remember going to my first expo, oh gosh, years and years ago, probably 2009, 2010. And this is before I had gotten any other snakes at all. And I don't even remember what booth it was or anything, but somebody had out an adult Vietnamese blue beauty snake, and they were just free handling it. And I think I sat there and watched for 30 minutes. So that they've always been a dream snake for me, and I finally have a chance to have them, and I can understand why people love them so much, because it's weird to think about intelligence with snakes because they don't really show that very much, but Vietnamese blue beauty snakes definitely do. They're definitely thinkers. You can see them watching, I can see them watching us right now, what the heck are you guys doing out there? So, and they're really inquisitive and super active, and they're just beautiful. As far as keeping wise, they're not that difficult. They don't need a lot of the high temps that some of our pythons do. They're happy being in mid to high 70s with a hot spot of 80, 85 is perfect. So their requirements are pretty low as far as that goes. Obviously, the biggest thing is they get huge. They get 10 feet long. So that's probably the only downside that I can see, but I love them. I'm obsessed.
In your opinions, what is the best way someone should get into breeding and selling?
Research. I mean, starting off with tons of research, but to get into breeding is also pick something that you're passionate about. I started with rainbow boas, oddly enough. I kept regular boa constrictors at that point and had a couple odds and ends, but I ended up with a pair of Peruvian rainbow boas, and read up a bunch about breeding them and knew they were a popular animal, and amazingly got first year success with them. Paired them up, observed locks, and 120 days later I had a pile of goo and a bunch of babies on the ground. The selling half of it certainly takes some patience. Good communication is key with buyers. We didn't do expos. Oh gosh, for the longest time we always had such a small operation, if you will, that it was Craigslist in the early days, forums. When Morph Market came around, we were amazed. We're like, yeah, thank goodness. And Morph Market's been great to post items on for sale. But yeah, I think initially it's doing your research to properly breeding the animals, making sure they're healthy, making sure they're the proper size, understanding your market. If you're trying to start into a saturated market, understand that, it's not going to be breed them and 3 months later you've sold all your babies. If it's a heavy market and you're breeding something that's already out there a lot, you might have to hold on to them for a while, and you have to be okay with that. And you can't view it as a moneymaker. This needs to be, especially starting out, it needs to be something, in my opinion, something you're passionate about and something you're doing to share the hobby. I think some people get into it because they see the latest and greatest designer morph selling for 10 grand. Like, oh man, I can buy a couple for $3,000 each and then spit out a bunch of $10,000 babies. Well, there's a lot more to it, and obviously, so yeah, that's my thing. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree, and I think networking is really important as well.
We're terrible at that.
I know. Jeff and Kendra really taught us a lot about how to do that, and obviously the social media aspect of it too. But I think the more important thing with networking is just learning from other people's experiences, learning from not just the older keepers that have been in the business for decades, but also the new ones that might have an idea about a different style of enclosure you can try, or different types of research out there. Obviously the internet is a huge space and there's always good and bad about it. So I think if you network with actual keepers, I think that will help as well. And keepers that are breeding what you're interested in, being able to talk with them about their experiences, I think is really important too. So that's how I started, with corn snakes. I started breeding corn snakes, but I asked millions of questions on forums that I found, and then I actually went over to one of our friends that I'm still in contact now, and she was willing to show me basically her operation, how she did it, and she was spitting out at that time, 20, 30 babies every season. So we're talking 60 babies of corn snakes every year. So, which probably now looking back doesn't seem like a lot, but to me it was like, oh my gosh, this is huge. So just being able to have those conversations with people, I think, is really important.
Most enjoyable and least enjoyable species you kept and/or bred?
Most enjoyable kind of echoes back to the Amazon tree boas, but a new favorite is the Boiga nigriceps. I've kind of delved into the world of Boiga, and they're fascinating. Definitely a little more reclusive, not quite the display animal that the Amazons have been, but they've been rewarding to keep, and it's been a learning process with them. Thankfully, started with well-established animals, so that's made the process a lot easier, but obviously there's a ton of different Boiga out there, and I definitely want to go further down that road. So that should be fun coming ahead. I think the least favorite for me would have been the jaguar morph of carpet pythons. When they first came around, all the pictures are great. The still images, and the word was out there. People knew there was neuro, and I knew what I was getting into when I bought them. I think I was still surprised by the level of it. Some are worse than others, of course, but it was a real detractor for me. Handling was a little more iffy, and health issues that are associated with it. It just kind of put us off from it. We still have one jag left in the collection, but I don't foresee us getting any more. If we can ever get him to breed, we might produce a clutch or two. Not a long-term project for us at this point.
Yeah, and I think for me, my favorite species, again, back to the blue beauties, I really look forward to working with those more in depth, just kind of seeing where I can take that. I'd love to be the Nick Mutton of the blue beauty world, kind of just dive into keeping track of that lineage and seeing where that, specialized breeding and outcrossing can go with those guys. I feel like a lot of that hasn't been done yet, which partly is probably because they're just harder to find. So that's understandable. It's harder to find unrelated animals in the industry there. Least favorite, I think, for me is going to be the rainbows. They're gorgeous animals, but they're kind of jerks. So I can handle a snake bite just fine. It's just for some reason they hate me. Every time they hate me. So I think that's the main reason why. I mean, with anything that we keep, I deal with it, especially like the Amazon tree boas. It's funny because the ATBs don't really have good aim, so you can kind of predict where they're going to bite you, but the rainbows, you have no idea. They just sit there and freeze, and then they just go berserk. So that's probably my least favorite that we've bred and kept so far. I don't know. That might change. We'll see.
Ask us in a couple years with the Bismarcks.
Yeah.
We might get there.
Yeah.
What should people be prepared for if they want to keep bigger monitors?
So I've had two black throats. The biggest surprise for me with the first one was how fast it grew. And the first one I had was...
baby when you got
it was baby, but that was in,
I think, junior hairs that we're talking about him. He's starting to move in there.
Yeah, that was early 2000s when I got the first one, so there wasn't a lot known. I mean, people were starting to breed them then, but I didn't have a lot of good information on how fast they grew. And I had a small enclosure, and I was shocked that within months that small enclosure was not enough, and so I built a bigger one. And within months, not years, that one was not big enough. And so anyone looking to get into black throats, white throats, savannas, Salvador water monitors, even Argus or Kamingi or anything like that, don't buy it and go, oh, I've got a year to get its future enclosure done. No, you should pretty much already be in process or have that big enclosure done by the time you acquire the animal, because you will be blown away at how fast, if you house it properly, how fast it grows and how much it will eat. And not overfeeding it just the same. I mean, you need to feed it a lot, keep it hot, provide it with room to roam, but don't, I've seen people lose monitors to obesity. I mean, it's a common thing in big snakes, a lot of snakes, is people overfeeding, because a black throat, I can feed it and feed it and feed it, and it'll eat till it's pretty much ready to burst if you let it. So I would say the biggest thing was being prepared with the enclosure, and at full grown, being prepared for the strength. I mean,
that was what I was going to say. Like, I can't, I'm 5'6" and probably like 130, and so I'm not a very big person, and I can't handle Junior by myself. He's too strong. He throws me around like a rag doll. For me to do any kind of interaction with him, he has to be here. And even if I could physically handle Junior by myself, I wouldn't want to, because and same with bigger snakes. You talked about having a handling buddy with retics, because they're so powerful and you don't even realize it until something goes wrong. Junior now, he's pretty calm, but for a while there, he was pretty unpredictable. He's smart enough to understand the difference between food and your hand now, but before, even though he knows the difference, he didn't care. So he would still kind of mouth gape at you and be like, okay, you have your hand, I'll eat that. He never actually got us, but it's just being aware of their size, their strength, and, like Chris said, not overfeeding them. Because if you think about in the wild, and most monitors, correct me if I'm wrong, are carrion eaters. They're opportunistic. They're not being hand-fed really good meals every single day. They're going 2 to 3 weeks without eating anything, and then gorging themselves on something dead. So if you think about that anatomy, their stomachs are not used to having something in it at all times. They have to be able to have that digestion, and like Chris said, having that super hot spot of like 160?
No, 130. 120 to 130. No.
So, but even then, versus like snakes, where we have the hot spot of like 85, 90.
Yeah.
That's a big jump. Doing the research and making sure that, you have the accurate space for the adult, and knowing that they're going to use every single inch of that space as well.